Hi guys, welcome back to the channel. FPL Consult here, and in today's video I'm going to discuss my top 10 Salah and Son replacements. Now both Salah and Son have already racked up the highest number of transfers out this game week, and for good reason. Both of them will be leaving for their respective tournaments, so the AFCON for Salah and the Asian Cup for Son, and they probably will be missing from game week 21 to game week 24. And of course, in yesterday's video as well, I did mention that both of them could also blank in game week 26. That is a high likelihood if Liverpool and Chelsea get to the final of the EFL Cup. So at this point in time, we need to start looking for Salah and Son replacements. I'm sure some of you guys have already started moving for them, but what I would actually advise is to hold out on your transfers, because there will be FA Cup games and EFL Cup games. By the time you're watching this, maybe some games have already been played, and that could of course bring some injuries to some players that we could have wanted to bring in the first place. So I would say to hold out on your transfers until some games have been played, to kind of assess the landscape after those games as well. But in today's video, in no particular order, I'm going to discuss my top 10 favorite Salah and Son replacements and discuss a little bit as to the pros and cons of each of these players. And of course, I won't be including the highly owned assets like Saka and Palmer. Both of them are already very highly owned, so I don't see a reason to discuss them too much. I would look at the 10 players that probably we will be looking to bring in right now, and of course, try to give an objective view on these players, whether we should bring them in or not. So of course, if you do enjoy this video, please drop a like and also subscribe as well if you are new around here. I just want to say before we get into the video that I think yesterday's video that I uploaded was probably my most well-received video, so thank you very much for all the support that you guys have shown on that video. It has received an incredible number of likes and comments as well, and you guys had a lot of positive feedback from me, so I really appreciate that. If you haven't checked it out, I'll leave it at the end of this video. At the end screen, you can click on that video, and basically I discussed the predicted doubles and blanks. So if you do want to check that out, wait for the end of the video and you can click on it as well. If not, you can just click over to there right now. Right, so let's jump into the video and let's talk a little bit about KDB and Foden here. So I've grouped these 10 assets in terms of teams as much as I can. So we're going to discuss the Man City assets first. So let's discuss the similarities between both of these players. So firstly, both of them play for one of the best attacks in the league. And honestly, I feel like when you're confident that both of them start, you're almost certain that you'll be getting returns because of the way City play. They just always create so many chances. Players are coming back from injury, players like Haaland, etc., elite finishers, and these players like Foden and De Bruyne can actually tap on these elite finishers to either get assists or play off of them and get goals as well. So I really like the look of Man City assets. They are also going to start a very good fixture run now. Newcastle away, technically it's not supposed to be an easy fixture. It's listed as red here. But looking at the way Newcastle are playing recently, you could actually see quite a couple of goals from Man City in that game. So I actually don't think that's too tough of a fixture. And then of course after that they have Burnley in 22, Brentford in 23. The fixtures after that look really good, and there's also a very good chance that the Man City versus Brentford game that is yet to be rescheduled could be moved to game week 25 or game week 28, giving both these players a double in those game weeks as well. So really good prospects there. But I think something to consider about both these players, and that's also the downside here, is that Champions League would be coming in for Man City in February. That's when the Champions League games would start, and of course, usually when that happens, Pep likes to rotate his players, and of course, he tries to prioritize the Champions League games as much as possible. So maybe we could see players like De Bruyne, players like Foden start in the Champions League instead of the Premier League as well. So they have loads of attackers coming back from injury. Grealish is back already. Doku is stated to be back soon. Haaland, of course, should be back soon as well. And then they have Alvarez, who's been doing pretty decently, but he could, of course, be dropping to the bench with the return of players like De Bruyne. So I think rotation will start to be quite a big concern come February. And of course, I think none of the Man City assets that we're discussing here or the other Man City assets that we talk about, like, some people want to bring in Bernardo Silva or, Doku, Grealish. None of them are actually guaranteed to start, even Alvarez at this point. So I would say that only Haaland, once he's back from injury, is guaranteed to start. And discussing Foden in particular now, I think the numbers are really good for Foden. In recent game weeks, he's done really, really well. And I think he, as a player, is fantastic in the middle of the park. I think he navigates the tight spaces really well, finds his teammates, pops off a pass to them, gets an assist because of that, or he plays off of them and then after that pulls off a shot and scores. So I think he's really good, especially in the tight spaces. And I think his confidence is really high right now. The manager is also singing praises of him. But I think with Kevin De Bruyne returning, I feel like he may no longer be playing in that central role, which I feel is his best role of late, right? Because he creates loads of chances there and he also gets shooting opportunities there. If Kevin De Bruyne comes back, I think there's a good chance Foden actually moves to the wings, either on the left or on the right. He could play in either of those wings. And of course, I'm not saying that he's a much worse asset in those positions, but I think his attacking numbers could come down because of that. So I would say the return of De Bruyne could see Foden no longer play in that central role, which I feel is where he would be the best FPL asset. So that's also a downside of Phil Foden. But that aside, I think he's still a great option to go for. Now for Kevin De Bruyne, he's only played one game this season, so we can't really compare the stats as well. But we know how good of a player Kevin De Bruyne is, and honestly, that's all we can go by for now, right? And I would say that there's two main downsides with Kevin De Bruyne. So the first thing is his price tag. His price tag is at 10.2 million. So I think this is slightly expensive and it will make it hard if we go for De Bruyne now. It will be hard to get Salah and Son back later on, both of them. I'm talking about bringing Salah and Son together back when they're finished with their tournament. I think it will be hard to fit a team of, say, Trent, Haaland, Kevin De Bruyne, and then you want to have Salah and Son. I think it'd be quite difficult to have a team like that. And secondly, De Bruyne's minutes is in no way guaranteed, of course, because he's just come back from a super long injury. So I assume that his minutes will be heavily managed. And of course, with Champions League, you would imagine that he would probably start those games and then maybe get rested in the Premier League. So at this point, I don't think you can guarantee whether he starts until we see some consistent game time from him, week in, week out, that he starts a couple of games. I think until then, for me, he's still a non-option. So at this point, I would say that in terms of City assets, I would go for Phil Foden instead of De Bruyne. But I do understand that for those of you guys wanting to go for De Bruyne, you're looking for an explosive differential, and De Bruyne could be that one for you. But there is quite a high risk with going for De Bruyne. So that is these two players discussed in detail. Let's take a look at the next two players. So next up we have Jota and Luis Diaz. So let's discuss both of them together first. Now, both of them are expected to get better minutes because Salah is now leaving for the African Cup of Nations, and basically it leaves an empty slot where both these players could feature in. Naturally, both of them are actually left wingers. Jota has played there before, Diaz has also played there before. I don't think we've seen either of them play on the right wing that much. I think if anything, Jota is the one that's likely to move over to the right wing. But of course, there are other players that Jurgen Klopp can deploy on the right. Players like maybe Gakpo or Nunes could also feature there. We will have to wait and see. So hopefully, by the time you're watching this, Liverpool have already played either in the FA Cup or the AFL Cup, and you can get some insight as to how Liverpool are going to function without Salah. But I think with a potential double game week on the horizon for both of these players, because as I've mentioned in yesterday's video again, that Game week 26 is likely to be a blank for Liverpool, and therefore that fixture in Game week 26 could be moved to earlier to Game week 25, giving Liverpool a double there. So if Liverpool do double in Game week 25, I think there's a good chance that moving for a Liverpool player now could pay off as soon as Game week 25. So I think that's something to consider, but of course, as I've mentioned as well, that they blank right after that in Game week 26. So your strategy will have to be quite spot on for that one. And I think in terms of each asset in particular, let's talk a little bit about Jota first. So for Jota, I feel like his data is honestly quite elite. Now, it's not just because it's over a smaller sample size. Even in past seasons as well, his data has been one of the better ones in terms of Liverpool attackers. And I think he honestly is one of Liverpool's most clinical finisher, especially when we look, he passes the eye test, and his sharpness and alertness in the box just makes him really, really good. I think he has that knack of knowing where to be in and around the box. So that's why I feel he gets a lot of goals and assists. I think as compared to Luis Diaz. Luis Diaz is also a pretty good finisher, but I think he's more a technical player, and his role currently is kind of featuring a lot more starting on the wide left, right? So I feel like in past seasons, Luis Diaz was slightly closer to the goal, but of late, I think if you look at the heat map that we can see here as well, he's starting slightly further out wide. I think that could be due to Jurgen Klopp wanting to create space in the middle there by Luis Diaz holding with, create space in the middle for players like Szoboszlai to occupy those spaces and maybe take a pot shot if the chance arises. So I think because of that, Luis Diaz has seen a slight drop off in numbers. That does not mean that it's not great. 0.30 expected goals per 90 is still pretty good. And yeah, so both of these players I think are pretty good assets. I would just say that in terms of choosing between one, I would probably go for Jota, simply because I think there is a decent chance that for some games he would start through the middle, and if he does start in the middle, I think that's where he is a really, really good asset to have, because we've seen him pop off with quite a number of double-digit hauls. He has that in him. Now, the downside with Jota, of course, is that he has that knack of getting injured here and there, so he could be an issue if he starts to pick up injuries. But if not, I think I prefer Jota to Diaz. Now, I think just the last point, right, on Jota versus Diaz, I think something that we haven't really considered, right, is also how Darwin Núñez and Gakpo will be played in this front three, right? Because there's also a possible chance that maybe Gakpo could play as a number 10, right? Maybe with Szoboszlai being injured currently, he came out with a hamstring injury towards the end of the game week 20 game. Maybe Gakpo could come back, and then therefore we could see all of those attackers feature. So Jota, Diaz, and Núñez up front. Maybe Gakpo's at the back. And of course, they have loads of other options as well. I think another one that comes to mind is Harvey Elliott. Could he come into the team for Mo Salah as well? Right. So these are all things that we need to consider when we're talking about Liverpool assets. But I think in terms of which one I would go for here, I would probably choose Jota, and I think he's a very, very good differential to have because he's only at 2.3% ownership, right? So I would probably go for Diogo Jota. Now, comparing him to other assets, I think it's a different story. But in terms of just a like-for-like replacement, Salah to Jota, I do like that one. So next up, we have the Spurs attackers. Now, Spurs is also another team that is in flying form right now. They're scoring goals for fun. And of course, Richarlison and Kulusevski are the ones that come to mind. There is also Brennan Johnson as well, but we'll discuss him at the end of the video. For now, talking about Kulusevski and Richarlison, I think something that we need to consider is that Son will be leaving. So that could, of course, be a huge miss for Spurs. But at the same time, Maddison is expected to come back at the end of January, which is game week 22. So that's not too long away. In terms of game weeks, in terms of actual time, it is actually the end of the month, right? But game week 22, we could see Maddison back, and that of course could help the attack. And then Kulusevski and Richarlison could see better numbers as well, right? So in terms of fixtures wise, before we jump into their data, I would say that again, there's a good chance that there's a good chance that Spurs will blank in game week 26 if Chelsea progress to the AFL Cup finals. Now, again, this is because if Chelsea moves to the finals, they would no longer be able to play in that game week 26 game, which is with Spurs. So therefore, Spurs would have a blank there. So that's something we need to consider, that a blank could be on the horizon for Spurs players. But aside from that, I think their fixtures moving forward are pretty alright. Manchester United away in game week 21, not the worst fixture in the world, looking at how United are defending right now. And of course, on top of that, they are in really, really good form, right? It seems as if they can score against pretty much any player, any team. And Richarlison in particular, he's doing really well in terms of his confidence, his form right now. And of course, he is listed as a midfielder but playing as a centre forward. So ideally, that is kind of the perfect FPL asset that we're looking for. He has the potential to be very explosive. And of course, being in a more central role, looking at his heat map here, he can take more shots, right? So when we're looking at returns from midfielders, we generally would want more points, and the points really come from the goals. It contributes more to bonus points as well. So I think scoring a goal is more important than creating a chance or getting an assist. And that is where the comparison with Kulusevski comes in, where Kulusevski is playing more on the wide, on the wide positions. if you look at his heat map, of course, it is heavily concentrated on the right wing. That's where he usually operates. He swings in crosses and he acts more as a creator rather than a finisher. That's not to say he hasn't picked up a number of goals. He has, of course, but the goal threat is much lower than Richarlison. You can see 0.14 expected goals per 90 for Kulusevski and 0.60 for Richarlison. So that's incredible numbers for Richarlison here. So I think this one is pretty straightforward. I'm not going to spend too much time on this one. I would say Richarlison is a better asset than Kulusevski. And of course, for a cheaper price tag as well, 6.9 million in good form. And his ownership is still at a pretty low ownership that makes him a decent differential, 7.3 million. 7.3%. I imagine that a lot of people will be moving to Richarlison here, right? So I would say Richarlison is a great asset to consider in terms of Salah and Son replacements as well. So finally in this video, we have Jarrod Bowen appearing here. Again, it's in no particular order, but I've just grouped the above three sets of players in terms of teams. So we just covered the City, Liverpool and Spurs attackers, and now we're moving on to more individual assets from different teams. And Jarrod Bowen is finally here, so let's discuss about him. I think he's arguably one of the best assets to go for right now. Now, data-wise, it has been great over the course of 20 game weeks. We have had 20 game weeks to look at his data and it's incredibly consistent. To put up 0.41 expected goals per 90 across 20 game weeks is really, really good. And he's listed as a midfielder playing as a centre forward. So similar to Richarlison here. And this is really the ideal situation that we're looking for. In terms of technical ability and the eye test, Jarrod Bowen is super clinical. I think he's a really good finisher. And usually when West Ham get a goal, Jarrod Bowen is always somehow involved. You just have that feeling when it comes to West Ham and Bowen, right? So they are starting a very decent run of fixtures from game week 21 onwards, starting with Sheffield away. So I would imagine that he is going to be very popular, and of course he's already risen in price, and actually he's the most transferred in player for game week 21, right? So there's good reason for this, and I think I have no issues with him whatsoever. I'm probably going to bring him in as well. He starts 90 minutes, he plays 90 minutes and starts every game, and honestly I have nothing really bad to say about Bowen. The only thing I would say is more about the players around him. So players like Paqueta and Kudus are currently out. Now Kudus is because he's going to the African Cup of Nations. Paqueta is because he's nursing a bit of an injury. So with these two players out, maybe we see West Ham being less creative or less sharp in the attack, and therefore maybe Bowen's numbers could come down during this period. So I would hope that Paqueta comes back because I still want to bring Bowen in. I don't think Paqueta and Kudus being out for the time being would deter me too much. So I will probably still look to bring Bowen in, and hopefully Paqueta is back in time. Kudus, of course, will need to only come back after the African Cup of Nations. But at least for now, if Paqueta is back in time, I think that it would bode well for Bowen's numbers as well. But that's pretty much it. I don't think Bowen is hampered too much by that. I would still choose to go for Bowen. In terms of Pascal Gross, he has caught the eye a little bit. I've received quite a number of comments on him, people asking whether they should bring Pascal Gross in. Now, I get the appeal with Pascal Gross. He has gotten quite a number of returns of late. I'm just not super convinced still, right? So this could be just my own opinion, but so don't get me wrong, I think he's a very underrated player. I think he's super consistent in terms of his numbers as well. So in terms of the eye test, I think he looks pretty alright. But I think just the fact that he is playing as a kind of a box-to-box midfielder, if you look at the heat map just beside me here, it's pretty much all over the pitch. He's everywhere, and he's not in a position, or he's not playing in a position like maybe centre forward or off the wings, or even as an attacking mid. He's playing none of these. He's playing as a true centre mid everywhere on the pitch. So I think in terms of that, I just don't rate him too much in terms of getting a lot of opportunities to get goals. Of course, he is someone that has many routes to points. He is on majority of set pieces, corners, free kicks, etc. And potential penalties as well if João Pedro is not on the pitch. So I think there are upsides and there's pros to going with Pascal Gross. But for me, because of his role, I just don't think he's attacking enough in open play to just score goals and get hauls, right? So I think there's definitely a good chance that after this he could get a couple of returns here and there, maybe a couple of assists. but he just does not strike me as a player that would severely hurt my rank if I don't have him. So I think you compare him to someone like Richarlison at a similar price point, playing as a centre forward, there's much more haul potential for someone like Richarlison there. So I'll probably just go for an option like that. In fact, for Brighton assets right now, I think the best one to go for is not actually Pascal Gross. I think João Pedro is the one that's the best one to go for, because Adingra and Mitoma are out for now. Whether they're going to their respective tournaments, we don't know yet, because they're both nursing respective injuries. And of course, João Pedro is listed as a forward, so he's not technically a good replacement for Salah and Son. They're playing different positions, or at least they're listed as different positions. But I would feel like in terms of Brighton assets, João Pedro is the one I would go for, and really not Pascal Gross. So the point is, I think there are better mids to go for than Pascal Gross. I wouldn't put you off going for him because there's upsides to him, and of course, if you see the fixture run there is really good. Brighton are actually top of the fixture taker from Game Week 21 for the next 6 game weeks. So if you do want someone who's nailed 90 minutes, many routes to points, go for him, but I personally just wouldn't. So finally, we have Odegaard and Bruno Fernandes. Now, before you guys laugh at these options, I would say that I completely understand both of these assets are underperforming assets right now. Their numbers, though they're alright, for the price tag is definitely not what we are expecting, and also not what we're used to, because in past seasons, they have provided elite numbers here, but they've seen a huge drop of both of them. And in terms of the graphic in the middle here, where you compare their stats per 90, it's also very similar in terms of how they function, and I think they're just very, very good chance creators for their teams. But aside from that, I think they've definitely seen a huge drop-off, and I do understand if people don't want to go for them. But what I would say for both of these teams is that they have similar things going for them, in that their fixtures going forward are really good. So Arsenal's fixtures look good, and also Manchester United's fixtures for at least quite a long run. I think a good number of game weeks, Manchester United have green fixtures here. But then again, Manchester United have just been in poor form. They put off a good performance against Aston Villa, and then they lose to Nottingham Forest. So we just don't really know which United team is going to show up. Do we want to invest 8.2 million in someone that is going to be that risky of an asset here? So I would really say that the only thing going for them is fixtures and of course legacy of what we know they're capable of. Bruno Fernandes potentially could still be on penalties if Rashford's not on the pitch. We don't really know yet. I think Rashford took the last one, if I'm not wrong, but maybe that could be just to help his confidence, etc. Maybe Fernandes is still the first choice penalty taker. Odegaard, of course, we've seen him take a couple of penalties off Saka, but that was of course when Arsenal was scoring more goals. Maybe now when they actually do need to score more goals, because now they're attackingly, they're not scoring as many, maybe Saka still takes them. So I would say there's good reason if you guys want to avoid them, but there's also a good chance that you would be ahead of the curve, because these players are definitely players with good ability that we know can pop off if they turn a corner. Basically, both of their teams, if they turn a corner, which they are capable of, then these players you would expect would be in and amongst the returns. So I think there's no right or wrong here. I think you could look really stupid if you move for it and it doesn't work, or you could look like a genius if you move for either of these players and you just go ahead of the curve. There's really no in between. So I would say that I just wanted to mention both these players as players you can consider if you want to go slightly different, and if you actually have a hunch that maybe Odegaard or Fernandes would kind of take off moving forward, because I do like their fixtures and I know what they're capable of. So that's just a mention to both of these assets, just in case anyone is actually considering both of them. So finally, to wrap up this video, let's just discuss a couple of cheap midfielders that I think you guys can consider going for as well. So let's start with Eberechi Eze. Now, the reason why I haven't included Olise, which is someone that we usually think of when we talk about Crystal Palace assets or cheap Crystal Palace assets, is because Olise is now injured and he's out for an unspecified time because of a recurring hamstring injury. So hopefully it doesn't keep him out for super long, because he looked really good and I actually wanted to bring him in as a differential. So unfortunately, he would no longer be in the Crystal Palace side for quite a while. That, of course, could be detrimental for Eberechi Eze because both of them functioning really well together. When Eze and Olise are back, I think Crystal Palace is actually a really good attacking outfit, right? Because you add Jordan Ayew to that as well. I think it looks pretty good. But unfortunately, Olise just has not been able to be fit, and therefore, I think the only asset we can consider from Palace is Eze here. But again, he is also just back from injury. Will he get consistent starts? We know he is the first choice penalty taker, but again, if he needs to be managed, maybe we see him taken off slightly earlier. And then again, that I mentioned, Olise not being in the team could be detrimental for him. Now, next up is Brennan Johnson. Now, he's much cheaper than Kulusevski and Richarlison. He's only at 5.8 million. He's cheap. The chance creation numbers for him are really good this season. He's picked up a couple of assists for Richarlison of late. And of course, he has that knack of scoring a couple of goals here and there as well. I think the downside for Johnson is that Solomon will be coming back soon. So Manor Solomon actually did pretty well just before he got injured. I think Solomon was actually looking like he would displace Brennan Johnson. But of course, he got injured and then Johnson got a good run out in the team. He's done really well. And Brennan Johnson could feature on the right as well, but the right is usually where we see Kulusevski here. But we did see Brennan Johnson play quite well on the right when Kulusevski was suspended. So I think with more attackers being available, it could just mean that there would be more rotation risk for Brennan Johnson. And of course, when Son is back in Game Week 25, then maybe Brennan Johnson could see more rotation. So things to consider with players aside from the other popular options that are slightly more nailed, like Richarlison and Kulusevski here. Another thing just to note, because he's a Spurs player, is that I just mentioned just now, he could blank in Game Week 26. So do take note of that if you're moving for Brennan Johnson. Next up, we have Gibbs White. I'll discuss Gibbs White and Anthony Elanga together because both of them are from Forest. Now, I feel there's a good chance that Forest could be onto something here because they've just had wins against Newcastle and Manchester United. You don't know technically which Nottingham Forest team would turn up that day because they're perfectly capable of pulling up a stinker as well. But I do like the run that they're on and the confidence that they have right now. Fixtures moving forward are not the best for them though. So they have Arsenal and Newcastle in the next 4, but as I've mentioned, you don't really know with Forest which team is going to show up. Of course, they are capable of doing it if they've done it against Newcastle and Manchester United. So I think you just really would be taking a risk here of them doing well against these teams. I would say they look sharp, right? And if they can put up a performance like they did against Newcastle, there's a good chance maybe they could do well, right? So Gibbs White, I think, just to discuss a bit more about the players individually, Gibbs White is more of a creator. He's on set pieces, etc. He's probably the one still on pens as well if Chris Wood is not on them. So Gibbs White more a creator, I think less of a shot taker. But Elanga is the one that's more explosive. He's a winger, he likes to take shots. He has a great partnership with Chris Wood right now. So it's looking pretty good. They look dangerous in the box as well. So I would say for those of you considering a really cheap midfielder to go for, you could actually go for Anthony Elanga. I think he's a great gamble, and if it doesn't work out, you can just bench him. It's not the worst thing in the world. Right. So next up, there's Pedro Neto. Now he's finally back. He got a couple of minutes against Everton in Game Week 20. And we would remember his incredible run of points at one point before getting injured. He was getting so many assists I think his numbers in terms of assists are still one of the top for the Premier League right now, even though he's been out for so long. So that's the potential we have there with Neto. But we actually thought Wolves would struggle without Neto, but it's been quite the opposite. Wolves have actually been doing pretty well, especially Hwang and Cunha up top. They've looked really good. Sarabia is decent as well. So Neto coming back is actually coming at a really good time for Wolves. Hwang is leaving for the Asian Cup, so I think just nice. Neto would slot back into the starting 11. We'll see how they shift players around, but I fully imagine Neto would come back into the team and take the set pieces of Sarabia as well. And he would be a great differential to have if you want to go for him. Now, next up is Douglas Luiz. Now, he's a unique asset because he's playing as a defensive mid. And that's why most of us have been writing him off this season. But somehow, this man just keeps picking up returns, right? Largely from penalties, yes, granted. And largely from some assists as well from free kicks. But somehow, he's just quietly ticking along. So maybe it's time we change our thoughts on Douglas Luiz. He's pretty cheap. So if it doesn't work out, if he starts to blank for quite a while, maybe you can choose to ship him out. but I think you can do much worse than just going for Douglas Luiz, and if he doesn't work, then you bench him. I don't think it's the worst thing in the world, right? And then lastly is Garnacho. So I would say that arguably out of everyone here in this cheap midfielder section with 6 million and below, Garnacho is the one that I feel is the most explosive among every other cheap asset here. United have a good run. I did discuss it just now in the section discussing Bruno Fernandes. They have a good run, and Garnacho seems to be getting consistent starts. So at his price point, if you need a super cheap midfielder, say you're doing Archer to Haaland and selling Salah to a really cheap midfielder, I think Garnacho is your guy. He's really cheap, 4.7 million. I fully expect him to do quite well moving forward. He could be an asset that a lot of us won't be actually going for, but someone that could still be doing well at the side, right? So there we go with the cheap midfielders, and I think this is pretty much the end of the video. Unfortunately, I didn't really check the time as I was recording, and I know this is going to be quite a long video. So if you watched to this point, thank you very much. I hope it was useful for you. If you did enjoy it, please do drop a like. Please do subscribe as well. As I've mentioned in past videos as well, I will be giving a Fantasy Football Hub membership to one lucky subscriber on the Game Week 22 deadline stream, as a token of appreciation for all the support last year. So if you want to enter, all you have to do is be subscribed and you will be entered into the draw that will happen in Game Week 22. But if not, thank you for watching, and I will see you guys in more Game Week 21 content coming very soon. Bye bye.